podcast of the PPO, podcast about everything from the world of public procurement.
Good day, dear listeners, and welcome to Public Procurement Office podcast. Today we are talking with our special guest from Austria, Mr. Uwe Flach. Mr. Flach, could you please introduce yourself and your role within the Austrian Federal Procurement Agency, BBG?
Good day. First of all, thank you so much, Petra, and thank you also to Public Procurement Office Slovakia for this kind invitation. It's truly an honor to be here and to share some experience and some of my personal ideas around public procurement. So I'm looking forward to exchange our ideas on how we can shape public procurement in the future and make it really impactful for our countries, but also for Europe. I've been working in the area of procurement and organizational development for quite some years now. And since 2014, I'm leading within the BBG, the Federal Procurement Agency of Austria, the division of consulting, organizational development and international affairs. So in my role, I'm focusing on driving strategic initiatives, both in Austria, but also on the international scale. And I must say I'm passionate about improving procurement practices and also fostering professionalization and administrative efficiency in this sector. I also represent BBG in international networks, including the CPB network, which is a network of centralized purchasing bodies in Europe, and in OECD's leading practitioners on public procurement, a specialized organizational unit on OECD for public procurement.
Your BBG is considered as one of the best, actually, that we know in Europe. So can you tell us how it all started?
Sure, I can. So we started almost 25 years ago. So we have next year the anniversary. You have 25 years this year. We're going to have it next year. And we started actually in 2001 with around 20 people in our organization. And by 2002, we had like 71 framework agreements available for our customers. Nowadays, just as a comparison, we have almost 200 people working for BBG, and we're offering more than 2,200 active framework agreements to our customers. So let's start in the beginning. When BBG, Austria's Federal Procurement Agency, was founded, the mission was clear to us. Centralized joint procurement for the federal institutions were set up to achieve, let's say, the most professional tender procedures and especially to optimize outcomes. And
who came with this idea? Well, how did it start? Who was the leader of the idea, we should do it this way?
The government had the idea of optimizing the administration, and one of the areas was, of course, public procurement, as it was decentralized, done individually by each of the ministries, actually. And so the idea was to really gain some benefits. Of course, you have economic benefits in terms of bundling demand, but it was also about professionalization, security of the tenders, and so on. It sounds really simple, right? But to be honest, in the beginning, many departments, and I guess it's the same in Slovakia, were used to do it decentralized under their own, let's say, responsibility.
Actually, it doesn't sound simple at all. As you can see here in Slovakia, we still don't have decentralized purchasing body, and it's a big dream for many of our partners or public procurers or municipalities as such. So could you please tell us what were like the biggest challenges that you were facing while establishing the organization?
As I said, it was not easy and it was a major shift. So you can imagine, by taking away responsibility from decentralized procurement organizations and bundle this in a centralized way, it was not just an organizational change. It was also a change in mindset. So one of the biggest challenges was, of course, to handle this resistance. You can imagine, naturally, there was a lot of resistance also within the ministries.
From which bodies was the greatest resistance?
From the procurement organizations or the responsible procurement staff within the ministries. So because they were kind of afraid of losing their impact, losing responsibilities for their budgets, also for the outcomes. So that was one of the big challenges in terms of the, let's say, centralization or cooperative approach. Another one was, of course, the procurement law, because now imagine you have single individual tender procedures on a different scale, and now you move to a centralized model. You're working with framework agreements and so on. So it was very important to handle these complex procurement procedures properly. So there was a lot to be invested in the right procedures internally also at BBG to make sure that this is following standardized processes and can be handled in a legal correct way. And it was, of course, about trust building in the beginning on all sides, on the ministry side, that BBG can deliver the value it was promised, but also on the, let's say, market side. And that's another big challenge we had in the beginning, is making sure we still support small and medium-sized enterprises.
Exactly. This could be really like the main concerns that everybody is facing. So how then did you manage to actually be so successful?
So it was from the beginning, of course, one of the main goals of BBG to also support the small and medium enterprises. And it was also considered in the law on purpose, so that we need to make sure we're centralizing procurement functions, we're not disturbing our market structures.
So if I understand correctly, government made really sure that it has the full support from their part so that this could be actually done.
Yes. So it was on purpose also said by the government, because imagine large framework agreements that with higher volumes and so on could disturb, of course, the competition and also the possibility of smaller enterprises to take part in public procurement.
Could you please now explain to our listeners, because we have 3,000 municipalities in Slovakia, which for such a very small country is a too big number. If you were talking to mayor, for example, can you explain him how actually he can work with your system? Because I think it is very attractive for such a small municipalities or villages that actually it works like a catalog, right? Where you can actually choose the subject that the BBG takes absolutely full responsibility that it is done properly according to the law, and there are no fears about any economical issues or other issues that might be raised from the law point of view.
Yeah. So this last point you made is, I think, one of the most important. It's the safe harbor rule. So meaning if BBG as a central purchasing body puts a framework agreement in place to be used by different contracting authorities, such as municipalities, ministries. These contracting authorities falling under the safe harbor rule, meaning they are safe in terms of procurement law by just calling off, how we call it, from this framework agreement. So one of the biggest advantages for example, in municipality, as you ask for, is the law security, meaning they don't need to care about any of the thresholds, not of a formal procedure or whatever. It is available. This has been done under the responsibility of BBG. So if in the procedure there is an appeal or something, BBG is going to handle this until it is solved, and afterwards contracting authorities are able under law security to call off from these framework agreements.
So is this, do I imagine it well if I say this is really like very secure shopping from like a shopping cart?
It is in many cases. So of course you have different product groups to shop from. So if you're talking about standard, let's say goods and services you need in the administration, we're trying to bring this via our e-shop, which is our, let's say, central catalog platform and procurement platform. We bring it in a shopping catalog-like manner to the municipalities, for example, and other contracting authorities. So it's like in private sector. If you go and shop somewhere in one of these very well-known shopping malls, the electronic shopping malls is very similar. You select items, you can configure them, you put them into a shopping basket, and then based on your internal rules, you can use and order them accordingly. So it's very kind of self-service we're providing. And of course, others like electricity, this is of course not in a shopping cart, in a catalog, but still all information are available and also in a kind of self-service mode to be ordered.
How many goods and services do you offer now in your portfolio, let's call it?
If we look at our e-shop, which is the electronic platform, there we have around 3.3 million goods and services currently available, so 24/7. If you look at the overall number of framework agreements for all goods and services we are responsible for, as I said, we're having around 2,200 by now. And just another point on this electronic platform, because that is very important for efficiency, for transparency and controlling. So we're running around 130,000 electronic orders, purchase orders, how it is called, via this system. So we can ensure via this end-to-end transparency for us and also for customers and suppliers.
Is using this system mandatory in your country, or how is it actually used and by who?
Using the e-shop is mandatory for all our framework agreements and all our contracting authorities. So that means all our tender results, so every single framework agreement, every lot is contained as information in this system. And then we have, of course, for the, let's say, structured goods and services, we have the obligation to follow an electronic process. Because you can imagine also on the other side, we have a vendor, a supplier. So imagine we have around 2,700 contracting authorities who using our services. And imagine the supplier on the other side would get from 2,700 different channels an order.
But this is Slovakia.
And this is how we channel also all the orders and all the transactional processes via our e-shop system. That's why we make it mandatory for our customers, but we also make it mandatory for the suppliers to say, okay, once you award it with a contract and that is suitable for electronic processing, you have to provide a catalog and you have to take orders only from the system and not via email, telephone or whatever.
If we were to start our own purchasing body, what would be your advice for who to make it mandatory and for what reasons?
This is one of the important questions in the beginning, to make it mandatory, voluntary for contracting authorities. What we have done in Austria was to make it from the beginning mandatory for the level of the federal administration, meaning all ministries by the law, how we got set up in 2001, they were obliged to use our services in the defined product groups, which had the advantage, of course, that it helped us to sell the service and to get volumes and speed into the new processes. If you do this on a voluntary basis, which is of course maybe considered as less pushy from a central perspective, but of course you might have more difficulties and challenges to speed up in the beginning to bring for the first framework agreements the valid volumes together, because what is very important is once you start, it's not only the contracting authority side which you need to consider, but also the market. The market knows there's a new institution, most probably a bit more professional because it's bundled knowledge and skills, but the market is also concerned about the volumes you're tendering in the beginning. Are they real? Are they big enough to have attractive, let's say, incentives for the market? So having a smart move on deciding mandatory versus voluntary is very important in the beginning, and you need to do it based on your structure in the country. It's a cultural point as well, and you should do a very thoughtful analysis of the spend to identify not only who is taking part in the centralized system, but also on what categories you might start. Because important is in the beginning to show also the value and have a proof of concept, let's say, that you delivering additional benefits value to the taxpayers' money actually.
But all in all, you would still recommend for Slovakia to actually start with something like this? As far as I know, there are actually very few countries in European Union right now that don't use central procurement. And every time I talk to anybody from the procurement world, the advantages prevail so much.
Yeah, it's as far as I have learned from Slovakia, you have currently a procurement system that faces a lot of challenges in terms of fragmentation, inefficiencies, and you said that's
exactly.
inconsistent practices across the contracting authorities. So a CPB for sure could help to address these issues, to overcome this, and you have a few, let's say, benefits you need to consider, and the most important thing, I guess, is before you start really centralizing is to have a clear picture on the targets, on the purpose. You should define clearly why you're going to set up a central purchasing body or such organization. Because there are a lot of benefits, but you kind of need to make sure and prioritize them to be able to really deliver in the end. So such benefits could be the cost savings, could be efficiency, standardization, as you said, improved supplier management. You need to look into the markets, right? Transparency and control. I guess it's for all of us a very important point. Professionalization, capacity building.
Yes, this professionalization is very interesting because, there are like so many regulations coming from European Union right now. I talk about this with every guest in our podcast, and not everybody actually realizes how many new rules will be put into the whole procuring process. And once again, I will have to go back to this very unique system of administration that we have in Slovakia. How can we want from mayors to actually be responsible and to know all these rules? It is simply not possible. So this could help us to solve this problem as well. So I was thinking this is also one of the huge advantages that could be that could actually help us with this future. How are you looking at the future from these European regulations? Are you somehow working with the new regulations or preparing yourself for that?
Yes, we're looking into it because we are all impacted in the same way. So all the regulations and also now the new directives coming from the EU level have a direct or indirect impact on our work we do in the public procurement sector. So what we do in Austria, and this is very interesting, we just started, I think, a couple of days ago, the procurement law reform in Austria. So if you remember, or maybe you don't know exactly, but we have also the current EU directive transformed into our national law in 2018. And now, of course, time has changed. We moved forward. We have new let's say, frame conditions, be it crisis, be it supply chain issues, be it geopolitical issues, so that the actual procurement law does not really cater for all the new, conditions we have in our country. So we started a reform of our legislation, and that, of course, takes into consideration all the developments on the European level. So we know there's a big pipeline with sectorial files, with the review of the directive. But we started already at the national level to look into these and looking into our threshold regime, which is also important. Now we have inflation and everything, so thresholds need to somehow adapted. E-forms is a big topic, so there's a new e-form, so we need to also make sure on national level we're using them are meaningful and most efficient. So there are a lot of points we're taking into consideration, and we just started this law reform in Austria in parallel to the review of the EU directives, because we need to also make sure that all these developments and also the new points from the Commission side recognized and implemented on the national level.
How would you measure the biggest success of central purchasing body in your country specifically?
When we talk about the biggest success of central purchasing bodies, and especially also the success of BBG in Austria, it goes far beyond just the traditional savings. Because that is, of course, in the beginning, one of the main goals that you say savings, cost savings, that is important, and that is one of the significant, let's say, success factors.
Have you ever measured the real cost save? Is it possible to actually really measure it?
Measuring savings is a very difficult task and exercise because you have a lot of attributes. One is really the acquisition cost, which you can measure, like old price versus new price. I'm just simplifying now. The other aspect you need to consider are savings in the actual process costs. Imagine you do the procurement procedures decentralized. Every single organization needs to run a formal procedure. What that means in terms of process costs, not only for the organization, but usually they would then need to involve most probably some lawyers to make sure it is all legal confirmed and so on. So this is the second point. So you have acquisition costs, you have process costs, and then is another point which we take into consideration now is we have framework agreements for 4 years. Usually we measured savings only on the day of the awarding of a contract. What we're going to do now is we're considering also what is the market price development over the next 4 years. Because maybe we have a great framework agreement, market prices go up, but our contract enables us to realize lower prices. So this is also a saving for the future. So it's very complex. Many, let's say, organizations are really kind of struggling with this and being dependent on different contracting authorities which come from different levels of pricing and services. It's very difficult to have just the one and only number for savings. So it has more dimensions.
What are the biggest challenges you think you're going to face in the future, or let's say in the near future? Because the world is changing so much. There is so much talk, for example, about AI, about new technologies, about the data processes. So the EU regulations we mentioned. So which one of these challenges do you think are going to be the hardest to overcome?
I guess it's difficult to say which one is the hardest. They will all impact us, and the issue is that they all have in itself also in the dependencies. So it's very difficult to rank them. I think what we need to make sure is that we have professional organizations ready to handle those. And I guess we will have in 5 years other issues we are not even aware of right today. Now. So the same as if you would have talked to people 5 years, 6 years ago, that the war, that the COVID crisis will be our issue and will tackle us. So I think it is important that we get ready for new challenges coming around. And I think the future is very uncertain. And I cannot say which is the biggest challenge right now. But I think one thing is clear. We cannot predict the future, but we can create it. And you can do this only if you have professional organizations, professional people working in this field trying to handle those changes and make best out of it for public funds.
I also wanted to ask you about PPE Plus organization. So you are actually organizing every year this excellent event. I was also very lucky to be part of it thanks to our cooperation with the Public Procurement Office. I have to say for me it was one of the best experiences I had so far within the public procurement. Can you tell us a little bit more about what's actually the main meaning for this PPE Plus event?
Yeah, so we were happy to have you in the course, Petra, of course. And we are honored to run this EU initiative, which was initiated by the European Commission in 2018, first time. We're running it now since that in a continuous way. We're currently in the 5th round of this PPE, Public Procurement Excellence Program, where we are able to provide training and expertise to experienced public procurement staff from centralized procurement functions or policy-making bodies across Europe. And this program is not only a training program where you, of course, acquire a lot of skills along the whole procurement cycle, but also soft skills and economical skills. But I think, and you might confirm this, the biggest advantage is the network of public procurement experts you're building out of this program. So by now we have a PP alumni network of over 140 experts across Europe, and I think this is one of the most powerful results out of this program, beside the individual, personal, of course, training for the participants.
I absolutely can confirm. For me, it was amazing to actually talk to other colleagues or even you, because I have known so many new information. Like, for example, we were talking once about the contracts, and I was so surprised that Austria doesn't have to publish every single contract, like, for example, Slovakia, because we are always considered, our countries, to be like the worst. But our measures that we have here in our country are really strict, comparing maybe also to other countries. So is it still true?
It's partially true, but we have now in Austria also since September the new Freedom Information Act, which obliges also public institutions and the administration to publish much more on information which was considered as confidential before. So we're moving in a similar direction. But of course, what I have seen in Slovakia and Czech Republic, for example, in terms of the contract register, what you just mentioned, this is something which is, I think, not unique, but not that often seen in Europe or in the European countries. So I think it is great to have such transparency, because in the end you're dealing with public money, right? So every citizen, taxpayer should have the right also to see where's the money spent and what it is spent for. Of course, there's always a thin line between transparency and having business, like say secrets, and making sure you're not disturbing markets by publishing, offers, for example, pricing insights in some industries. So it's a good thing to do, but of course you need to be also careful to not be in a way kind of influencing maybe markets by having too much transparency, for example, in the contracts.
Do you have some last comments you would like to share with our listeners?
I think my main point I would like to emphasize again in the end is that when we talk about public procurement or procurement in general, it is, of course, about the law, it's about processes, it's about organizational setup and so on. But please don't forget procurement is people business. I think the most what we really need to understand is that behind every tender, behind every framework agreement, behind every compliance check, whatever you have in mind, there are professionals striving this. So, and I think that is most important, because we are the people are the ones who make it in the end more transparent, efficiency and impactful. We need to keep this in mind, and that is also very important for you as a country when you move to the next level or the next step of reforming your public procurement landscape. Please make sure you have this in mind. It's people business. You need to have people following you. You need to have the visionaries to run for these ideas. And I think through collaboration, professionalization, and shared commitment to public value, we can shape the procurement landscape of tomorrow. And I would also emphasize again that I really support Slovakia's initiative in this area, and we are, as partners, ready to share our experiences and to help also the Slovak administration to move on. I can just say thank you very much for this exchange. Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Krásne.
And all the best for your endeavors, and I wish you a successful reform in this area.
Thank you, Uwe, very much for accepting our invitation. Thank you very much for our discussion. And thank you, our listeners, for having this time with us. You are listening to the Public Procurement Podcast with Petra Šupáková.
Podcast of the PPO. Podcast about everything from the world of public procurement.